Do your end users always, and I mean always without exception, work on company-owned devices and IT-approved apps? I didn't think so. So my next question is, how do you keep your company's data safe when it's sitting on all those unmanaged apps and devices? 1Password has an answer to this question: Extended Access Management. 1Password Extended Access Management helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device because it solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. Check it out at securityweekly.com/1Password. That's the number 1 password. Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Ben Carr. Gentlemen, we're going to get into articles, but the biggest news that broke this weekend was Amit Yaron's passing. Like it completely knocked me over on Saturday. I worked for Amit twice. I worked for him at RSA. I worked for him at Tenable. Obviously, I helped recruit him to be the CEO at Tenable back in the day. Like I knew he was battling I think it was a cancer diagnosis, I think throat or something like that. But it was just it was super shocking. He was such a visionary. The work he did at RipTech and NetWitness, it's just horrible. I mean, a ton of beautiful stories on LinkedIn, but I mean, that's a big loss for the industry.
We lost a great leader.
I was with him at Tenable, right? I was still there when he came on as CEO. It was just really kind of shocking. I know Dove and Elad. Like it's just, kind of took me by surprise. I saw that he was going to step away again for a little bit, and then this came out right on the heels of that. So, a really, really good guy in cyber. Big loss.
Yeah, big loss. So I had to cover it. I've spent the last couple of days trying to figure out what, if anything, to post. I can't, like, every time I sit down to write it, I can't finish it, right? It's like, so I'm like, I'll cover parts of it today just because he was such a good friend and just such a great leader. He will definitely be missed. All right, so let's get into our normal articles. So the first part of this, there's some really interesting CISO articles this week that I pulled. I've been pulling these since our break. And so I've been stacking up a number of articles over the next few weeks to kick off the new year. And there's a series of these CISO-based articles that are interesting. They kind of intertwine a little bit with some of the other stories. So the first one, the evolving role of the Chief Information Security Officer. There are some debatable statements in here. Like the opening line has risen to a strategic position. We wish the Chief Information Security Officer has risen to a strategic position. But yes.
Nirvana.
Yeah.
Well, it followed out right on with that. Traditionally CISOs manage firewalls, monitor networks. Like, no, not really. Like that's kind of a misunderstanding and misperception of what we really do. Right. Like, we have people that manage firewalls. We have people that monitor networks, right, and leverage endpoints, right. It is a more strategic role than that, but I think that's the perception of a lot of people in the business. It's a very technical role, and I think that's what we talk about that a lot here. We're trying to change that.
Yeah, and I mean, at a high level, the article hits some of the pieces that we talk about a lot, right? Making sure that the CISO has business acumen, making sure that they know the business. They're involved in financials. They're heavy communicators and educators. They're trying to integrate themselves into the business. But, I pulled out a section here, and it was a section called the seat at the table. Yeah. And the first statement in that section said, regulations are not driving CISO's elevated role within an organization. And I sat back and I said to myself, holy crap, that's the only stick we have right now.
Yeah,
right.
Is regulation.
Right.
Yeah, and if they followed up there, CISOs are now involved with discussion around M&A, digital transformation initiatives because of the regulations. Right? Like,
exactly.
The driver.
So that one threw me back a little bit.
Yeah. I went to the same line, Jason. Like, that's scary because
in my heart of hearts, guys, I hope that was a typo and it should have been now. Regulations are now driving CISO's elevated role. Like, I'm hoping that's a typo.
Right.
Yeah. And we hope that will change in the future.
Right.
We do. We absolutely do. Right. Because that's what we want the role to be strategic. We think the role should be strategic. That's why I said we're not there yet. I mean, in some organizations it's there, but in general, it's not there yet.
And I think in general, like one of the things is if a business actually realizes the change agent that a CISO can be and the value that it can bring to the business, and that could be perceived from customer differentiators and game changing. There's just so much there that I think if we actually got away from the regulatory being the driver, it would, I think, change the conversation within an organization.
Sure. But I mean, unfortunately, other priorities overshadow the priority of cybersecurity these days, right? And that's why I said it's kind of the only stick we have. So I don't want to lose that stick. I want us to evolve, yes, but I don't want to lose that stick. That's the catalyst to the evolution.
That's funny.
Yeah. So this next article talks about the business cybersecurity, the CISO's role in alignment and pervasive governance. Now, I'm not a big fan of the term governance in general because just the way most people interpret governance. But I think what he did talk about in this article is kind of the three-legged stool, how you have to balance business objectives with IT operations and security functions,
sure.
right? And if you think about it, the strategic position of the CISO has to understand all three of these pieces, right? And I think that's been part of this challenge, this evolution we've been talking about, is if they're only focused on the security functions and they don't align to business objectives or understand how it impacts IT operations, they're missing the other two components. Therefore, they're not going to get a strategic position within an organization.
100%. Those three major focus areas are huge. The one place that I found a problem with this article was it was all dictated by what they called pervasive governance. Mm-hmm. And I channeled my inner Matt and I said, wow, this is a big G, little r, big C conversation that we're having right now. Guess what we're missing? Risk. I did a control F and I searched for risk. There's only two places in the article that mention risk, and one of them has nothing to do with cybersecurity risk at all. So risk isn't even a conversation in this article.
Yeah, look, and it has to be the foundational component to managing governance, right? If you're not thinking about risk at the core, what are you governing, right? Regulations.
Right. Exactly.
Back to regulations again.
Yeah, so this is one of the gaps I've noticed, and I'm starting to see a shift. We're not there yet, but how do you align risks to business objectives, right? This is another say easy, do hard discussion, Jason, right? It's easy to say, it's actually harder to do. But I started to see a little bit of momentum towards the end of last year of organizations trying to figure out, how do I align these risks now to my business objectives? Mm-hmm. And, I have a really good friend, he's taken over the Deloitte's practice. We've had him on the show, Jeff Recor, and he's rebuilding the Deloitte practice. And one of the things he and I have talked about is this concept of aligning risks to business objectives. Again, say easy, do hard, but over time, that's where the risk conversation, I think, ties into this governance model. But you're right. It's a big G, a little R, a little C. Yeah. The R has to be big because I don't know that you can effectively have governance without a risk component, because it's not all or nothing. Risk has to factor in the equation, just like we talked about on the last segment. Maybe getting to 80% is good enough because the last 20% is too expensive and doesn't give you enough risk reduction.
Yep. 100%. And at the end of the day, how are you effective in governance if you're not understanding the complexity of the risk around it? You're making bad decisions at that point.
And I think that's part of the problem with regulation and compliance, right? Like when you think about the way regulations are applied, usually it's 100% or nothing, right? Like if you think about PCI, must do this for everything. It's like, well, what if the value of the return on that is so low, but the cost is so high that it just makes it like untenable for the organization to really do that and be successful? Well, that shouldn't be required then, right? I mean, there has to be a way to think about that from a different lens to apply it appropriately to organizations of different sizes and different risks.
Right. And look, part of that non-compliance might mean that I have a slightly higher credit card fee, and maybe that's okay because the cost of getting fully compliant is more than the increase in the fee.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we all know that compliance does not mean security. We've said it a million times here. Compliance should be a byproduct of a strong security program.
Yep.
Right. So we know that that's not going to affect it. Check in the box.
Check in the box. CISO priorities for 2025, budget wisely. This is so one of the points in here kind of ties to who wrote the article around strategic consulting. However, there are some interesting points in here, right? So obviously we know that funding is going to be tight.
Yep.
Budget increases are, she says, that's fading. I don't know that they were ever there in the first place.
Right. I mean, we're coming off a really crappy economy right now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no question about it. So at least for the first couple of quarters, until we can see what kind of economy the new administration is going to start swinging here, there's going to be budget constraints. We're going to be asked to do more with less. We're going to be asked to tighten up our budgets and spend less and do more. And it's going to be tough, right? And I mean, at that point, it's conversations around how do you achieve economies of scale? How do you look at the things you've already invested in? We've talked about it here before, right? You may be buying Microsoft E5 licensing right now, and you're only using 30% of the capability of those licenses. Well, guess what? Start investigating that because you're already paying for it, right? So start looking at those places where you can realize economies of scale.
Yeah, and it talks about it. So the spend wisely is like the fourth topic in this, right? She's talking about up-leveling the team. We're going to talk about skill sets. The last article in here is really interesting to me on how people think their skill sets are going to be completely not required in 10 years or less or whatever the number was. But it was pretty interesting. So, she's here talking about up-leveling your team, maintaining your team, et cetera. She gets into the spend wisely on the strategic budgeting down in point 4. And to your point, focus on true ups and pair downs to reduce redundancies and eliminate underused resources like your E5 license. Right.
So, that's exactly it. Yeah. And I mean, we're always talking about getting that seat at the table strategically and looking like a business partner, right? Projecting yourself like you're a business executive. Well, guess what? Going out there and being fiscally responsible for the business, that's an important piece of being an executive leader. You're going to be seen as just not the tech guy trying to buy tools and, right, blinky lights. You're going to be seen as someone who actually looks at a budget, can manage a budget, and build out efficiencies within that budget. Yeah, that's how you get those executive chops.
Managing the budget doesn't mean like manage to spend 100% of the budget either, right? Like sometimes it's really helpful to come back to the CFO and say, hey, look, like I actually think we can pare down some spend here because we have the E5 and I don't need this technology and I'd like to cut this out and I'd like to give back 10% of this to the rest of the business. Like that can pay huge dividends to your CISO journey and to how you're seen as a partner because nobody ever does that. Like tell me one organization where you've seen somebody proactively come do that. So if you do that, you really come out looking with the different, the different lens, right? Like you're seen differently by the organization then. And I've seen that work for myself and other people.
Yeah. And it allows you to have a little bit of political clout within the organization later on. Like you mentioned, Ben, right? I mean, it gives you the opportunity where a CFO isn't going to forget that. Never mind the fact that you're a CISO. You have visibility across the entire organization. So get out of your own little security box. And if you see business applications that overlap, hey, maybe go identify that and bring it up to the executive team and say, I see HR and finance are using very similar tools.
Yep.
Maybe we could consolidate those. What would that look like?
Like you said, like people don't forget that, right? Like if you come back then in 6 quarters and say, hey, look, I really need this and I know it's outside of budget, but we need to spend, you're going to be perceived with a different, look than if you have always coming in with that same ask.
Yeah. And I mean, here's another one too, right? I mean, as security teams, we want to get embedded in the business. That means we get involved in business process because we have to understand it in order to secure it. Well, if you identify inefficient business processes, bring it to the table. Now you're seen as someone who wants to make the operations of the business more effective and more efficient.
Yeah, and your lens isn't only security. You're not only looking at that security piece, right? Like, so again, we talk about it a lot, that seat at the table. I forget who brought it up to me, but they said, look, you can have a seat at the table, but my expectation is you're not only talking about security when you're at the table.
That's right. 100%.
Right. Hey, there's a couple of very interesting lines that pinpoint some of this, right? Every dollar in 2025 will need to support the business's appetite for digital security. Effective budget management isn't just about cuts. It's about demonstrating and communicating strategic value at every turn. It's a value play, right? So is it worth the investment? Which leads into know which risks are too risky. Confirm that controls are defensible and adequate. And do so with confidence, precision, and refined understanding of the bigger picture, right? That's a risk management conversation, right?
Mhm.
If you're looking at the risks, you're looking at the controls, and you're optimizing around the value of that, you're going to be in a much better position as a security leader than if you're not doing that.
That last sentence in the article kind of sums it up a little bit, right? It says, by the end of 2025, the role of CISO will speak for itself. It'll be a company executive who leads with innovation, steadiness, and foresight. A chief information strategy officer in practice, if not in title. So are they trying to lean toward maybe a re-innovation of kind of what we talked about? What's the next step in the CISO role? And it actually links off into an article. I don't know if you noticed that, but it links off into another article that basically covers a chief information success officer, a guide for CISOs. I haven't read the article yet, but I'm gonna take a look at that.
Oh, interesting. I have to pull that into the next one. We'll cover it maybe next week.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. Next article, CISA releases the draft of the National Cyber Incident Response Plan. Now, this is in response to the executive order in 2023. It's currently in its public comment period until the end, January 15th. I did open. It's 42 pages. It's a really good outline for incident response. I guess my only question is, we have an administration change coming on the 20th. Yeah, I don't know if the stays are good.
Does it have a shelf life?
I don't know.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, from the article, I think it said it was originally published in 2016. So it was about due for an update anyway.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. 42 pages. And if you don't have, if you're looking for a good source to build a cyber incident response plan, go pull the documents free. It's off, it's NIST. I think, it's CISA.gov. It's on the CISA.gov site. Yeah. 42 pages, gives you a good outline. You just replace like the FBI and some of these other sources with your own folks, right?
Yeah,
not every incident.
Right in there. It's meant for both, public and private sector use.
Right. So, yep. Exactly right. Yeah. So anyways, it's a good source if you are trying to build your own incident response plan. It gives you a good starting point. Anyways. All right. How do I position myself to influence senior leadership? So HBR podcast talks. It's kind of a coaching session. So it's a really interesting.
It was very interesting. It was a very interesting session. I mean, it almost reminded me of therapy. So at the end of the day, it was an executive leader who was sitting down with an executive leadership coach, and they kept the person's name anonymous, but it was literally going in and saying, all right, I'm, a fairly new executive. I've been in my role for a few years. Here are the things that have met my expectations, and here are the things that haven't. And here's where we don't align. And there was like ready, set, go therapy.
Yeah. And it was interesting, the kind of the back and forth and some of the struggles, right, on where things were good and where things were off. It talks about culture and how to address some of the cultural differences, right? Because he talks about in this, how the culture is perceived at one level, but actually is not realistic. It's not implemented that way at other levels. Like it really walks through some of these really hard kind of questions and challenges that you might face. Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of executives face. Yeah. A lot of executives, I'm sure, face it, right? It's kind of that dichotomy between an executive of a business and the ownership or founders, right? And going through that strategy building and building out metrics and building out KPIs, and then figuring out maybe halfway through the fiscal year that the sense of urgency and the motivation of everything you talked about really isn't there to the level that you would expect or that you would want or that you're projecting for your team. And that's kind of where that mismatch happened, to the point where, the person being interviewed went back to the CEO and basically said, listen, are you on board for these changes? Like, are you really committed to these changes? Because I'm not seeing much action outside of the things that I'm pushing. And that's a hard conversation to have with somebody who founded and owns a company, right? That's a tough conversation to have. And really the struggle that he's having is that they keep saying, yes, we're committed, but the actions aren't following. Right. And it's not the small stuff. I mean, some of it's small stuff, but it's the big things. It's like, revenue targets, profitability, expansion of the company, all of the cultural and societal impacts that they promised that they were going to have on their community. They're not doing the big things. And that's where he's struggling.
Yeah. And it was all those setting the proper goals, measuring to those goals, realizing you're not hitting those goals. Are you sure those are the right goals? Like, are you really committed? This happens a lot in startup world too, right? Mm-hmm. You'll set lofty goals and objectives to get done. Then you try to measure against them and then you constantly miss them. Yes. And at some point you got to kind of step back and go, are we doing the right with goal setting? Like, are we doing the right thing here? Because what's realistic? But you get into these goal setting sessions and you're like, anyways, it just,
I mean, it's a lot of, I don't know if you guys have ever done that, but it's the BHAG, right? That big, hairy, audacious goal that everybody always talks about. You know, for the listeners, it's kind of like that, shoot for the stars kind of thing that you always go for. But it requires discipline.
It does.
And it also requires measurement and monitoring. Mm-hmm. Because with those BHAGs, you need to be able to fail fast if it's going off the rails. And if you're not keeping your eye on it, it's going to take your whole company off the rails.
I think a lot of things fail because there's not the commitment there, which is what they're generally getting at, right? Like you say, we want to do this, but then the actions don't actually match where you're trying to go, right? Like it's seen as out there, something you'll get to in the future. But your immediate actions can affect the long-term goal that you're trying to get to.
And one of the big struggles, just to kind of finalize on this, was, and there's a lot of people like this who have a really high level of commitment. And one of the things he came out with, which was kind of interesting to hear, he's like, I know I'll be successful no matter where I am. I'll be successful no matter what company I go to. If I start my own, I'll be successful. But I would love to see this team be successful. I'm committed. I'm in. Like, I want this team to be successful. So it's kind of that struggle between, that personal aspiration and knowing you're going to be successful and wanting to see the team be successful. See it through.
Right. Yep.
That was good.
My life is a startup executive, guys. I want to see the team succeed.
That's right.
Yes, for sure. All right. Last article. Workers fear their skills will be obsolete this decade, report finds.
Wow.
I took this article in two different fashions, right? Number one is the aspect of building your skill sets if you're a technologist, right? But the other side is building your skill sets just for the modern day workforce. Mm-hmm. Because there are different skills that you're going to need now. And it's that either way, it's that continuous learning and skills development that you have to focus on, whether you're in IT, cybersecurity, technology, or not, in finance and HR, wherever you are, you need to be continuously learning because the tools are changing so fast.
Right.
Yeah, so Jason, that's an interesting point, like how fast the tools are changing, right? Like I think that there are probably people in college now, starting off as freshmen, who are going to graduate and realize that they got passed by tech, right? And what they thought they were going to be doing, they're not going to be doing. And I wonder in some cases whether there's even the opportunity to keep up, right? No matter how fast you train yourself, some of the things that are going on with AI are going to make it almost impossible because of the speed of evolution of AI and
100%.
That generational change in and of itself. Like I think this is a real concern for a lot of people. I don't have an answer to the outcome, but I do think this is going to be more and more of a fear of, the workforce. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, here's just a simple version of it, right? And it's nothing to do with deep technology or tools. Simple fact. You could have somebody who's been in your organization for 15 to 20 years, and their job is to work in spreadsheets. Well, guess what? Now Excel has Copilot. You don't need to be building these formulas anymore. You ask Copilot a question, and Copilot will build the formulas and build the entire spreadsheet and build the entire dashboard for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now you're going to have to either have that person get those skill sets up to par because that 4-hour job just turned into 4 minutes. Right? Or they're going to get passed by and you're going to get somebody who knows how to prompt correctly in Excel to build out all these Excel spreadsheets and formulas and dashboards and all of that. That's the simple side of it. Never mind everything else.
Yeah.
So it's workforce continuous improvement. That development has to happen.
I think, Ben, something you said is very interesting in that the younger generation going into college may get passed by technology because they're learning like the basic skills in their programs that are taught off of the things we've been doing for decades, right? And all of a sudden, boom, they come out of college and it's like, holy crap, right?
It was interesting. The age of the people who are teaching them, right? And what they're teaching them, their skill set isn't being updated, right? So how do they get, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy in that way.
Now, I'm kind of glad I'm getting close to retirement because I only have a few more years left. So I only have to keep up for a few more years. But the young generation, they got a lot longer to go, man.
Right.
Yeah, my nephew was here over the weekend, and he's going straight to trade school, right? Like he's going to go, his vision is graduate high school, go into a tech program, learn how to weld, get into the workforce, get skills right away because going now to get a 4-year degree that you potentially get passed from a technology perspective, like, is it worth the investment anymore? It'll be interesting to see this, how the market shifts around some of these different tech areas, because the old style universities may not be the best place to learn as technology evolves very quickly, because those entities don't.
And I don't know if you're paying attention, but universities are closing at an alarming rate right now. Well, they're shuttering at an alarming rate.
And I think, we're all of the same kind of age span where, like, when we got into cyber, like, you couldn't go to college for a degree in cyber. Like, it didn't exist, right? And so we were kind of on that front side of things are evolving really quickly. We're going to get into it because we're interesting. There are a lot of people of our age who, like, were successful in cyber and didn't have a degree, didn't go to college, like, non-traditional way, right? Then it became this traditional mode of going into college and getting a degree and getting a cyber. And I think we're now evaluating, like, has that shift happened? Has the transformation happened? To your point, I'm a fan of micro and dirty jobs, right? Like, I think going and being an electrician, being a plumber, being a carpenter, like, I think that, strangely enough, that may be where the demand is for people who actually understand a trade and can do physical things, because people are going to be used to asking Copilot to answer questions or ChatGPT, and they're not going to know how to do anything themselves.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
No, I agree with you 100%, Ben. That's my point. Like, we could see a really interesting shift in skill set capabilities and in the workforce in the next decade.
And I hope to God that anybody going for a finance degree, they're going to be teaching them how to use Copilot in those spreadsheets, because if not, they're going to be behind the 8 ball the second they get into the workforce.
Yeah, 100%.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. There goes your 4-year degree, all your debt, and boom, you're replaced by a Copilot.
That's right.
Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening today. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.